Welcome to the Transforming Trauma podcast. Transforming Trauma is presented by the Complex Trauma Training Center. I'm your host, Emily Ruth, and I'm so glad you've joined us today. As a mental health professional, you care for others, and the Complex Trauma Training Center is committed to caring for you. We are thrilled to introduce our Space Program 2025, an inner development program of support and self-discovery for therapists on the personal, interpersonal, and transpersonal levels. Therapists often focus so much on learning skills to use with clients that we don't leave space for ourselves. This interactive experiential program offers an immersive learning environment designed to cultivate space for ourselves in our professional role. Together, we will explore in a safe, inclusive, and supportive environment designed to cultivate space for self-care and self-discovery, with the intention to create greater effectiveness and resilience in our professional lives. We will be exploring the obstacles that stand in your way of being the most present, heartful, and effective therapist possible. Please visit complextraumatrainingcenter.com and secure your spot in the SPACE program. It's time to care for you. Welcome to a very special series here on Transforming Trauma. We are turning the spotlight toward our amazing CTTC faculty, inviting them to share something we don't often get to hear, their origin stories of becoming therapists. This series was inspired by some deeply honest moments shared during our SPACE program, where faculty opened up about their own therapeutic failures, lessons, and growing edges. The vulnerability and realness they brought sparked something powerful among our community, and we realized how meaningful it can be to hear what shaped the people guiding and mentoring us. So in this series, you'll hear Stephanie, Marcia, and Brad open up about the messy, unexpected, and transformative journeys that led them to the work they do today. You'll get to know them in a more direct way, feeling into their humor, anxieties, aspirations, wisdom, and big hearts. It's a chance to get to know them beyond their professional roles through the same lens of honesty, reflection, and humanity that we strive for in all our programs. We're excited to share this Origin Stories series with you. I hope you enjoy. Brad Kammer is the founder and director of the Complex Trauma Training Center. Brad is a licensed psychotherapist, educator, consultant, executive producer of the Transforming Trauma podcast, and co-author of the Practical Guide for Healing Developmental Trauma. Brad is a senior trainer for NARM therapist and NARM master therapist trainings and mentors NARM therapists. Brad also developed and teaches the SPACE program, an inner development program of support and self-discovery for therapists. For the last 25 years, Brad has been committed to supporting individuals and communities in the transformation of trauma. Brad began his career as a humanitarian aid worker in Asia, working with personal and collective trauma. He later worked in community mental health with youth and families and has worked for over 2 decades in private practice. He is passionate about helping resolve the widespread impact of adverse childhood experiences and complex trauma. Brad's work focuses on the integration of somatic psychology, interpersonal neurobiology, relational models, and wisdom from traditional cultures and spiritual traditions. Brad lives in a small town in Northern California with his family and loves anything related to music, food, outdoors, and travel. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Brad Kammer. All right. Well, Brad Kammer, welcome to the podcast. So happy to have you here.
Thanks, Emily. So great to be back with you.
Yeah, this will be a fun conversation. So maybe we can just start there. What would you like our listeners to come away with from our time together?
Well, I've really enjoyed the series we started where kind of sharing about faculty's origin stories through CTTC. And, people are relating to us often kind of one-dimensionally as teachers. And as we've started developing this new SPACE program this year, we've really made it an intention for ourselves to share ourselves more transparently. I think we've done a pretty good job in the past, but I think we're taking it to another level. And I've been touched by how much feedback we've gotten. People have been really touched themselves by hearing more about our experiences, our vulnerabilities, our learning. And so it kind of struck this idea that you and I then put together about doing some of our origin stories about where we come from, what were the influences that shaped us. And so I'd love people to just learn a little bit more about that for me, even though I have some anxiety about that. We can talk about that and my connection survival style patterns, but I feel grateful that people care about knowing more about me. And I'm happy to share that for people that are interested.
Wonderful. I love it. I'm excited. And I kind of thought, well, I've heard all three of you kind of share your stories in different ways. And I've been so happy that there's like new things that I'm learning about all of you.
Oh my God, I've learned a lot about, I've known Marcia for over 20 years. And, there were some stories she told I'd never heard before. And then with Stephanie, I mean, yeah, some of those stories too were just like her therapist when she was a kid with the pipe. I have a relationship to pipe because my dad, when I was young, would smoke pipes as well. And so like we started to talk about all these emotional feelings we had. So it's been really fun for us too.
Yeah, that's so fun. Well, so we're calling this kind of the origin story series, yeah?
Yeah.
And I'm curious if we can just start right back at the beginning. Where did this start for you?
Yeah, well, I've been thinking a lot about that. Like, how far back do I really want to
Right.
go? Thousands of years in my lineage. But I think it is important. I mean, I was born into a family. My parents were second generation. My grandparents escaped, what was happening in Europe at the turn of the century and then in the early 1900s, being Jews. And so much of, I think, what I was brought into was my parents really wanting to assimilate and having kind of their own internal challenges around what that looks like, which it was not conscious or explicit at all, of course. In fact, it showed up, as pretty strong survival strategies in the language that we use in NARM. And so I grew up in a system that had a lot of narcissism and a lot of unresolved trauma on both sides of my lineage. And that wasn't being named, that wasn't being processed or worked through. And so I think from a young age, I was the most sensitive one in the family. And from my birth, my mom has a traumatic story right in my early week of my life that, definitely impacted me and my welcoming into the world and her relationship with me and how that impacted my relationship with my father. So from the very early moments of my life, like all these questions about, do I belong? How do I show up? Who am I exactly? Who are we? They were from the earliest moments of my conception for sure. And like a lot of us in this field, it's like we're just trying to do our work so we don't continue to pass down this unresolved trauma that we've received. So I've just been doing like a lot of work on those ancestral, intergenerational, cultural elements of my family system. And then, of course, how that manifested in my own attachment trauma, my family system. So as far as my origin story, some place in my very early life, I was one of these kids in high school and stuff that was always like looking up to the stars and asking these really big questions and super curious from a young age. So I think from a young age, my sensitivity was really a huge symptom for me. It caused a lot of pain and distress on all levels of my experience. And eventually, as I developed a new relationship to it, it became what led me getting curious about learning more about life and humans and healing and all that kind of stuff. So, I mean, those are my early moments of thinking back about being a kid who like my friends would come to me and share secrets with me. And like, what was it about how I was showing up that they felt safe to do that? So even though I didn't know anything about what psychotherapy was as a kid, I kind of like felt when I learned about psychology and psychotherapy, it was like, oh, that feels like something I already do. Like I'm already aligned thinking like that and behaving like that. Yeah. So I realize I'm talking a lot here, but these are my early childhood experiences that kind of started to get me more ripe for psychology and later psychotherapy.
Yeah. You named this curiosity and always asking these questions from a young age. Can I ask, how was it received? Was that part of the input that you were taking in, like the way that was being reflected to you? Or is that okay to ask that?
Of course. No, it wasn't received positively at all. I mean, I
Okay.
was, it depends on who we're talking about, but in most circumstances, I grew up in an era and in environments where it's like, children were just supposed to do what was expected. And my parents had, a lot of high expectations. It's part of that kind of still immigrant mentality of trying to assimilate by being super successful. But as we know, that external success doesn't always equate internal success. So yeah, it wasn't received. I mean, looking back now from the lens of like understanding family systems, I was the, identified patient. And so of course I felt this is where I'll probably jump into the connection survival style stuff because I always felt like there was something wrong with me. I was different, looking on the outside, looking from the outside in, never feeling like I fully belonged or knew who I was or where my place was. And so that created a lot of suffering for me in my first, let's say, 20 years of my life for sure.
So in high school, you started noticing, it sounds like you started noticing like more deeply, there's something really different about me. I'm curious, when you went to study in college, like what happened from there when you moved out?
Yeah, I mean, it was college was an extension of what was happening. I got the freedom. I wanted to go as far away from my parents as I could, that they would allow me to do, basically. I was introduced, I took a psychology class in high school, and I remember thinking it was pretty cool and pretty interesting, but it wasn't something that was on my menu that I was allowed to study. And looking back, it's interesting because I don't know how much of that was actually coming from my parents or how much of it was like me internally inhibiting myself so much. It's hard to know now looking back because it felt, as a child, you just feel so victimized. And I felt like it was all coming from the outside. But, now that you and I love this territory of agency, it's like I see my parents more three-dimensionally than I did, of course, back then. And so I don't know how much of it I was just interpreting what was happening in the environment and making it about me versus these were actually explicit messages. So sometimes it's a little unclear for me.
Yeah.
But yeah, I have a funny story about psychology in college because I was interested in it, wasn't really allowed to study it, or that's how I felt. So I studied business. I studied marketing. Yeah, which is like, people that know me, I'm horrible with money. I'm horrible with numbers. I don't care about those things usually very much. But it was something that I, was trying to find some interest in. But I took a psychology class, and here, my story is that I went to University of Texas at Austin, which at that point was like the second biggest college in the country. My class was 500 people or something, huge auditorium. And on the first day of my psychology class, it was the old days. You probably remember those projectors that they would use with the slide and it would project on. So the professor put this projector, first day of class, of the optic nerve. First day of psychology class, he put this slide of the optic nerve. And I was like looking around me at all the students and I was like, am I in the right class? Like, is this psychology? Like, because this is not what I thought psychology was. And that it was psychology. That's where he started. He started with the brain and the neuroscience. And I was so disinterested in it. And I dropped the class and I went in the direction of philosophy more. I took a lot of philosophy classes, but I always was interested really in psychology. Yeah. And then in college, same story, trying to find my place, not feeling like I really fit in, and got introduced to psychedelics, so I had some experimentation with that, which, looking back, it's very different than it is now, how it was back then. And it was a lot for me, someone with connection survival style, which I know you understand that, maybe not all the listeners do, but we'll talk about that. But basically it was a lot for me, but it did open me up to start to get interested more in spirituality. And so that was really the main takeaway from my college years, is I got really interested in spirituality and also about other cultures. I lived for a semester in England and I went to a very diverse program in London where people from all around the world. And so I had friends from all around the world, all these different countries, for the first time, really kind of exploring all these really interesting different cultures. It really opened my mind and consciousness in a huge way. So between the spirituality and between that experience, this was a big turning for me in my early 20s.
I mean, I know you studied marketing and there was a lot of it you weren't interested in. I mean, were there any other hints that kind of guided you, or was it after college that took you in this direction of studying what you did, getting your master's?
Yeah, I'm sure there was. I mean, some of the ones I remember is like I had a friend who had an older sister who was my earliest experiences of starting to get exposed to things like yoga and meditation. And I remember she used to always burn incense from India. I mean, these were all new things for me at that point. And I looked up to her so much. I really adored her. And she gave me, I don't remember. It was some Taoist book. It might have been the Tao of Pooh even. It was some introduction into Taoism. And I remember reading that and just being like, oh, wow, like I've never felt something so aligned for me. And so that opened me up again, just kind of to this interest in, I just was disinterested in my studies fully. And so I started reading and learning in all these different areas. And that then inspired me to go travel the world basically and learn from the world. That was what then I set my sights on after college.
Okay. And you did that.
did
You went and you traveled. And where did that take you?
Yeah, all over. I graduated college when I was 21. So for about 6 or 7 years there, I was in and out of the States and all over the world. And I was living and working and studying all around the Middle East and in Asia and Europe and different places in the United States, North America. I had just some incredible experiences meeting all sorts of different people and getting welcomed into different environments and cultures. And, I really saw myself at that period of my life on like a spiritual quest, a spiritual journey. Yeah, it was a pretty exciting and amazing time of being introduced to all sorts of things. And I remember the moment, literally the moment getting introduced to Wilhelm Reich's work. Obviously, he'd been dead for many, many years, but I was in a small town in northern India. And
Oh, wow.
yeah, and I was hanging out with this guy I met. I think he was a German guy. And, we were having these deep conversations. And he said, "Have you ever read The Function of the Orgasm?" And I was like, "The Function of the Orgasm? Wow, that's a provocative title."
Mm-hmm.
And then he said, "No, no, no, it's not like that. Everyone thinks it's like sexual and stuff, but it's like this very deep. It explains like the cosmos and about." And I was like, "Whoa!" Like it was like psychology and spirituality mixed into one. And I was like, I gotta learn about this. So that kind of planted it in my consciousness, and it took me a couple of years. And then eventually I landed in Vermont, where I was going to go back to graduate school. At some point, I kind of realized I wanted to study more psychology. And I met my kind of most profound mentor there, Peter Collins. And Peter's just so dear to me. And he was an old, what they called neo-Reichian. He was like a hippie in the 60s who got really interested in spirituality and consciousness and found this Reichian work. Reich was dead by then, but it was like the second generation of somatic approaches, second or third generation. So he studied things like bioenergetics and Hakomi, Gestalt, all these early models of somatic work, and introduced me to all this stuff. And so I started to study with him. I was a client of his initially, and he did the old school, Reichian stuff, the crazy breathing where your hands would start to kind of like twist up. I can't remember the name for that, what they call that.
Yeah.
There's a name for when like you lose oxygen in your hands. I mean, it was
Yeah.
intense.
And
It
it's
was
just doing this thing.
exactly, yeah. It was all on the floor. So the client would lie down and the therapist would be over you and kind of pushing at different parts of your body and stuff. And I was also in a men's group with him, and it was a very cathartic oriented group. And so there was a lot of screaming and yelling and grabbing things. And it was pretty intense for me at the time, but also just really powerful. And so that's kind of where then I was like, okay, this is what I want to study.
I just had this image, Brad, just like thinking of you as this young kid, what's on the menu? And then moving into this area, this territory, thinking, oh, doctor, marketing, business, and then moving into this. That's just like a real jump.
Yeah, well, and I left out a whole piece of it, which is people will find amusing knowing me, but I grew my hair really long. I had a long beard.
You did.
And I mean, all my friends called me Jesus and stuff because I looked at that point and, it was a real shock for my parents. I mean, now as a parent of, kids about my older son is exactly that age. And, it's interesting to think about back then before we had cell phone, email was just, happening at that stage. My parents had no idea where I was in the world for weeks or months on end.
Whoa.
Yeah. And I did get into a really, big shock trauma experience when I was in Thailand, which was another really important experience for me. So, I mean, now I can't even imagine that with my kids. I don't know how you would feel about that. But yeah, I was out there just like looking very different than where I grew up. And I mean, it's interesting to think about how much of that was like an FU, and how much of it was just like an autonomy thing of just like, I want to find who I really am. And I wasn't afforded an environment of like that was helping accurately reflect who I was and my interests. And so I'm going to just go find it and see what it looks like. And so, yeah, I was a long way from home. So they say, yeah.
Yeah. So you grew your hair long. You were doing all these cathartic, somatic pieces with Peter Collins. And where did you go from there? Because that was before your graduate program, all of that?
Let's see the timeline of it. It's interesting to kind of think about the timeline of it. Yeah, that was all before my graduate program. Yeah, I guess I met Peter right before. Yeah, maybe a year or two before. And then I also had my first son at that point. And so becoming a parent was a huge deal, of course, as you know. And so Well, I guess I knew on some level that I had a lot of unresolved stuff that I didn't want to pass down to my child. And so I started to really get interested in attachment parenting. And, these are also things that Peter was also very involved with. And so I knew I was coming back to the States. Wait a second. I skipped a whole period of my life. That's really important, actually, because one of the things that I did when I was in Asia is, first of all, I met my wife there. And then we ended up working with Burmese refugees for a year. And so this is kind of the beginnings of my understanding of trauma. So I wasn't yet a psychologist or a therapist or anything. And we just basically went to this border town. We had met some people and we went to this border town called Mae Sot on the border of Thailand and Burma, which is a really rough, disturbing town with a lot of sweatshops and really bad stuff going on there. And all these Burmese had to flee from Burma and were refugees basically living on the border, on the Thai side of the border. And so we went there and ended up working at a clinic. And then my wife continued working at the clinic. And then I worked with these incredible, they were young, they were my age, but these revolutionary leaders who had to flee and were trying to get asylum status because their life and their families' lives were in danger in Burma. And so I got in with this group, and it was just a life-changing experience because instead of being from like an outside Western aid organization that never really integrates with the people they're serving, we lived and worked amongst all of the people we were working with. And it was just an incredible experience to be welcomed into this community. Tons of trauma and lots of really destructive strategies that people were using to manage the trauma. But as you've heard me say in other experiences, it also opened me up to kind of two things that led me into somatic psychology, which was one is that I realized that all the rituals that I had been learning over these years in different cultures, they all had some element of embodiment. And it wasn't just all in the head like I had been introduced to psychology or other things in the past. So I got really interested in like, how do you bring these experiences into direct experience so you can feel them differently and feel empowered? And then that it has to be done in relationship, and I now joke that like as a psychotherapist, it's like we pull down our curtains and we lock our door and we turn on our white noise machine. It's like, it's so not the way that cultures have healed forever for thousands of years. So I got really interested then about finding some kind of approach to psychology that's going to really align with that, which is actually then what took me to Vermont, which is where I met Peter Collins.
Yeah.
I went to a program that I could kind of help create my own program. It's like a kind of like a self-study. They called it low residency program. So you'd go once a month, but the student had they got to shape what they wanted to study, which was a really cool program back then.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. So you enter this program. I mean, how did you find out about that program? Because that sounds really unique, first of all.
Another funny story. I mean, I got all these, it's interesting. Like at the time, these stories are just happening. You don't think about it. But now looking back, it's so interesting. When I was in college, I was really into jam band music. I actually still am. But so I got really into this band called Fish. That's, very popular now. So I started to, learn about their backstory, and they all emerged from this college, this really small college in central Vermont called Goddard College, which is an incredibly creative program. It's changed a lot over the years, but this was in the 80s when they went there. And basically it was trusting the student. So the student got to design exactly what they wanted to study. And then they would find mentors, from the school, but also outside in the community to help them design exactly what they wanted to study. So when I was getting interested in all this stuff in my 20s, I just had that in the back of my mind. Like there are programs that exist like that. And I was very nervous about going to a more academic program because I didn't want to learn psychology of the optic nerve. I didn't want to learn a soulless, I felt like I would quit if I would have done that. And so, I didn't even look at taking the GMAT or whatever they are. I didn't think about any of that stuff. I just was like, I'm going to find a school, a program that allows me to be me. And there isn't many, unfortunately. And so I just, trusted this instinct to show up. We literally showed up in central Vermont in a van. We lived in our van for a few weeks and then we found a place. And unfortunately, Goddard was going through a really difficult time. And so they sold their program to another college in central Vermont called Vermont College. So I ended up signing up to go to Vermont College. So they had bought that program. It wasn't exactly psychology. It was like an interdisciplinary program. So
Mm.
now Vermont College owned the program, and that's where I ended up going.
What did the program look like? Was it sort of this mentorship piece that you were drawn to?
It was amazing. Yeah, it
Wow.
was it was so cool. I mean, it was lonely though, actually.
Okay.
But let me tell you the positive, then I'll tell you the negative. The positive was I created this awesome program that was based on all these things, on spirituality, on shamanism, on somatic psychology, on relational therapy, on, well, I was really interested in cultural psychology and how we can bridge different, racial and religious. And I was bringing all of my interests into one program, and I literally created my own syllabus. You had to make sure you were taking all the classes to
Sure.
get you licensed,
Yeah.
but they gave us a lot of flexibility around creating it. And then, yeah, you get a teacher. I don't even think they call it a teacher. I think they call it an advisor
Mm.
through the school. And then you have to go find one or two people in your community that specialize. And so I had two outside advisors, Walter, who was a somatic psychotherapist, who is such a deep guy and interested in all those things I was describing. And then Eleanor Ott, who's pretty well known in central Vermont. She has a shaman background. And so I had these two incredible advisors. And I was working with Peter at the same time for my own personal work. And then
Mhm.
eventually I kind of got into a mentorship relationship with him. So it was just a really amazing time in my life of learning and healing and becoming a parent for the first time. Yeah.
That's so cool. Wow. I'm just holding, Brad. I'm feeling excited hearing you talk about this because I'm thinking about how I imagine this sort of prepped the groundwork for you creating the program in the center. Like what you're doing now. Like you're pulling all these things together and creating these programs that really nurture a learning that is so unique and different. And I'm feeling appreciation for this path that you've walked all these years that has brought you where you are and that it touches so many lives. It's super
Mm.
cool.
Thank you for naming that. Yeah. It's cool to have this experience to think about that because I don't spend a lot of time thinking about how those
Sure.
leads to where I am today.
Hmm.
I have one more huge positive piece of it, but I want to do the negative and I'll come
Yeah.
back. So the negative is that it was a low residency program, which means you would meet once a month for a weekend. And everyone had, because of the unique nature, everyone had their own study. So we weren't all studying the same thing. And so I loved the people that I was coming together with because it was really cool, interesting people, but we weren't all on the same page. Like we weren't all studying the same thing. And so
Yeah.
I felt really pretty lonely actually with it. They did require us to do an internship from the very beginning of the program. It was a really unique thing. Maybe they call it practicum now, but basically I had to start seeing clients right at the beginning of my program before I even learned a lot of this
Oh,
stuff.
wow.
Because yeah, it's very experiential based. And so I had another great advisor, supervisor, Andy Kelly, who is an amazing woman, amazing supervisor for me at the time. And she came more from a traditional background. So it was useful for me to have someone that also had a huge heart, but was really kind of holding more of the psychodynamic and relational frame.
Mm.
So I worked in a college setting for a couple of years, seeing clients with that. So this is where then this huge thing happened where I was in a food co-op in Montpelier, Vermont, where I lived. And I'm always curious. So I'm looking at all the flyers and people are sticking the flyers all over the billboard, over the chalkboard or whatever they put up there. And I saw this poster that had a big tiger on it and it said, heal trauma. And I was like, oh, that sounds cool, And so I ripped the poster down, I put it in my bag, and it literally sat in the bottom of my bag for months.
Mm.
And one day I pulled it out and it said, call this woman about this, whatever this was. I didn't even know. It said heal trauma. So I called Lynn, was her name, and she's like, oh, great timing. We have an introduction to this model that this is about healing trauma and it uses wild animals to describe it. So I went to this hospital basement with 7 other people and these 2 SC somatic experiencing practitioners from New York City. The guy played a guitar for us. It was just so funny. And then the woman went around and just did this very basic felt sense exercise. And when I came back from working in Thailand, I was a mess. I was really a mess.
Mm.
Before I came to Vermont, I was a mess emotionally. I was a mess physically too. All kinds of symptoms were happening to me when I was living in Thailand. So I really had to leave much earlier than I wanted to. So I was on this healing journey trying to, heal myself. And so she did this 2-minute felt sense exercise. And I just felt my whole system, particularly my digestive system, which is my weak spot in my body. I just felt this huge burning rising in my esophagus and into my mouth. And then all of a sudden it just like settled. And I was like, what is this? Like, this is nuts. I got to learn this, whatever this is, use it for myself to heal myself, of course. So I signed up for this training, and it was a somatic experiencing training. And because I was in college at the time, I got a grant to do it. I wouldn't have been able to financially do it. So I was really grateful. And I signed up for this training. 3 months later, we go to this, actually, it was on the college campus of where I was studying. I had just started my program, and it was also in a basement. And show up, there was like 40 people there, and Dr. Lawrence Heller was my somatic experiencing teacher. So I met Larry from that first day of somatic experiencing. I was the first person to do a demo in the group, which is weird for me because I'm so shy in groups.
Yeah.
But I volunteered and did this super powerful demo where I thought he was like doing voodoo magic on me and stuff. And he wasn't. He was doing NARM, actually.
Yeah.
Not even SC, he was doing NARM. But yeah, and I just fell in love with somatic experiencing. And that brought me into a community. So I wasn't getting my community in graduate school, but I got involved in the SE community. And it felt like my people, even though I was like 20 years younger than most people, but it felt like my community.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm resonating. There's several pieces in your story that you're sharing that I'm like, oh yeah, that was similar. My program was online, also very isolated. And I started with the NARM training pretty soon into my program. And I found my people. So there's some pieces there that feel really familiar.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, you showed up for an intro too.
I did. That was, that was another piece. It was super powerful for me. I was like, what is happening right now? I have to get more of this.
Yeah, people don't know this, but Emily came to an intro that I did, and you were the one who did the demo with me.
And it was like the same thing. It was the timing was just, I watched the webinar and you came to Scottsdale like a week later. I mean, it was just boom, boom, boom.
Yeah.
So super cool to hear your story and some, pieces there that sound really important for your path.
Totally. Yeah, meant to be for sure.
So you went through your program, you're simultaneously doing the SE training.
Yeah. Yep.
And Larry's becoming a mentor at that point? Or, I mean, I'm just curious how that played out.
Yeah, it was a very small group. I think there was less than 20 students in that group. And so, I started to really, bond with Larry. And eventually he started another training after mine ended in Vermont. And he invited me to be a training assistant. And so I got to kind of work on the other side of it with him, which was just huge learning for me. And in the meantime, I kind of was really passionate about this thesis I was working on, which took me forever. And I extended my graduate program to finish it because it was very much like the program was really designed around a thesis, which is more like a dissertation, actually. I think it was almost 300 pages, 250 pages. It was huge. And I was, fighting in a playful way, but definitely fighting with my advisors because Eleanor kept on saying my topic is way too big. The topic was trauma and civilization. That was my topic. And I said, I don't care. I'm doing it, So I wrote this whole thing about how I argued that basically civilization is a trauma response, a trauma reaction. And that, you can see it in the way that we have passed down for now 6,000 or 8,000 years, at least, these trauma patterns that are now built into everything that is happening around us. And I was I really immersed myself in this. And it really was healing for me and my whole intergenerational stuff that I wasn't even super aware of at the time, and parenting stuff, my attachment, and now being a parent. There was all these different elements of it. The early days of NARM theory were in this because I was studying with Larry and about the character structures, which is what they were called back then. So there's a whole section in my thesis about the character structures. I used a lot of Reichian stuff, SE stuff, somatic stuff. So it was just like everything coming together into this thesis that like I was exhausted after I finished it. Yeah. But it felt exciting to do that. So
yeah. And that thesis can be found. People can still read it. I know because I found it.
Yeah.
It's so interesting. And I hear what you're talking about. Like it's baked into our cultures, into civilization, and all of those pieces. I mean, I've heard you talk about the healing that also is kind of baked into many cultures. I don't know if that's the right word to say. Those things are they're side by side. There's the healing that happens, but also the trauma that's right in there.
That's what I was searching for in that thesis and in my life. I definitely was searching, and I still am. I mean, it's like I'm I'm still trying to find, and I think this is one of the things I bring to NARM is just as we develop new relationship to these strategies that are part of our trauma and that helped us adapt to the trauma, but also perpetuate the trauma. As we start developing a new relationship to the survival strategies, they can become our superpowers. They can become, the things that make us feel most fully human. And so that's so much of where I'm really interested now in my life.
I remember you saying that again to go back to my experience, but watching that first webinar, you said just something to that effect that like when we're aware of these strategies and our patterns, like we can actually work with them. I was like, what? You can work with them? What? I don't know. The idea that I could actually turn that into kind of a superpower, I know really drew me in because that was exactly where I was at. That's what I was kind of grappling with in my life. So
yeah. I mean, I think every one of my clients ever has been grappling with that. And so, we're in a bad shape in the world with the impact of all this unresolved trauma. So it's just been like my life mission basically to see what I could do to contribute to that.
Yeah. I feel like you spoke to this, but I wonder if you could maybe name more explicitly, like what obstacles did you find it all along the way? Is there anything that kind of jumps out at you to name?
I mean, there are a lot of internal obstacles for sure. I mean, because the next phase of my life after this thesis was that I got invited to teach. So basically, on the campus of my graduate program was a community college, and there was a woman who taught intro to psych who got pregnant and couldn't take the semester. So they were looking for someone and they knew me somehow and they invited me to teach. And I was deathly afraid of public presentations. I mean, it was like my biggest fear basically was about putting myself out in public and making myself be seen. And I would have panic attacks or use a lot of strategies to avoid. I spent my whole college year into my senior year of college. If I got the syllabus and it said oral presentation, I would drop the class and find another one that didn't have an oral presentation. Yeah, until my senior year where I couldn't do it anymore because I was so limited with what I needed to graduate. And I had panic attacks trying to give these presentations. I was deathly afraid of this, but I took it and, I've been working on that ever since. I mean, about my connection patterns. This is the language we use in NARM. It used to be called the schizoid structure. And it's the difficulty of feeling our aliveness and being seen in our aliveness and feeling welcomed and feeling included and feeling belonging and feeling okay inside of ourselves. So all of those things were just my lifelong struggles that came, well, that's a non-agency way. The agency way of saying it is that I started to stretch my capacity, my edges.
Yeah.
And I really loved the teaching and was terrified of it at the same time. So that was the beginning of like starting to have this very interesting relationship with becoming a teacher, where for the first 15 years of my career was loving it and being terrified every time I would go into class and using all sorts of different strategies to manage my anxiety and panic.
This is so, I remember the first time I think you mentioned this in a setting where I was like hearing you talk about this a little bit and I was floored. I was just like, what? This is something that you have looked at in your own life, and anyone who might have witnessed you teaching or whatever and isn't aware of this piece, it's really helpful. The idea that, these things that we struggle with, there's like an element that I get excited about, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. This, there's things that I struggle with, this idea that I can work through it and feel better about being seen. I mean, that's a piece. I'll just name it here with the podcast. I remember you and I having an early conversation. I was just like, this is not something that I feel super comfortable with, but I really want to have all these conversations. So I guess I'm going to do it. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just appreciate you.
Yeah. And you and I also have a shared history of being performers when we were younger.
Yeah.
We didn't talk about this piece of it, but being forced to do things either before you're feeling really ready or having the confidence or even not wanting to do it at all, but being forced to do it. Mm-hmm. And so there was definitely elements of that trauma. And I still, it's not over. I mean, I've learned to have a different relationship to my anxiety of kind of showing up in these larger ways, but I still manage it a lot. I mean, I was going off on this rant recently about that I really dislike presenting at conferences. And, some of it is true, what I was ranting about. It's like, it just feels so competitive and it feels so academic. And I don't know, it's just not an environment that I feel that comfortable in. But There's also the truth that I just am afraid of those. I feel threatened in those environments and I get
Mm.
much more anxious than I do when people have signed up. Like people in the NARM trainings or in the space program that we do, it's like people are coming because they want to learn it. Even though
Yeah.
they might have strategies around how they learn, at the end of the day, they're there because they really want to learn it. And in environments where that's not the case, it's harder for me, particularly in those more higher stakes environments. Like I actually got pretty comfortable teaching in college. And then I loved teaching in grad program because people were interested,
Hmm.
intro to psych and some of those requirements, people aren't yet fully bought in. But once you get higher, people get more fully bought in. And that's where I feel much more comfortable.
Yeah. Yeah, and just to, like, be present with you in the master's training and, like, really see you in that space, it's just clear that you're really enjoying it. So,
Totally.
again, to, like, think about the contrast there is just really useful for my own patterns, like, to look at, like, what's here for me to understand more deeply.
Exactly. Yeah. So this was part of my journey of somatic experiencing because, another part of the connection survival style challenge is this, what we call in NARM, this core dilemma between really deeply wanting things but being afraid of them. And so even though I was connecting to community, I also was using strategies you asked before about some of the obstacles. So did my first 2 years of the somatic experiencing training in Vermont. And then for the last year, at that point, only Peter Levine taught the last year, and you had to fly out to California to study with him. So I flew out from Vermont to study with him. And some people know this story, but I was sitting in the back of this huge auditorium and maybe 100 people or so from all different parts of the country. And me and my Vermont crew were talking as we were waiting for Peter to show up. And this woman in front of me heard that we were from Vermont and turned around and just was like, my son goes to school in Vermont. And we started talking. And then when we did our first exercise, when we were, going into our first dyad, me and Marcia Black chose to do this together. And that was the beginning of our 20 plus year relationship now, where her son at the time was in school in Vermont. And now he's an NARM therapist and an NARM training assistant. And Marcia's been such a huge influence in my life and actually was part of helping me like move out to California too, because she helped me kind of connect to the somatic community out here so that
Mm,
when I moved here from the East Coast, I had already a kind of a community that was developing through Marcia and through the SE community, which helped me a lot to make that transition.
I love that. That's
Yeah.
so exciting just to, like, think about all these connections and how things played out, and I don't know, it's really beautiful.
I have another great story. Is this still working for you?
Yes.
Okay. I think people will like this one. So Larry was my teacher for the first 2 years of SC. And so, I didn't know SC. So I'm just learning what
Yeah.
Larry was teaching. All these different trainings filter into one, back then, they all filter into this one training where Peter is the main teacher. So we get into our practice groups during that first module, and we were taught this somatic eye exercise, which is like you put your finger in front of the client's eyes, and they're supposed to kind of like track your finger. And you're like watching for like moments of disconnection or freeze or activation that you see in their
Mm.
eyes. So I'm a good student. I'm going to practice. So I sit down. Oh, and this is another important piece of the story. So back then we didn't have enough training assistants. So each group of 3, you'd have like one training assistant for like 4 different groups. So they'd be like kind of coming around to the different groups. So we're outside in this beautiful spot in Northern California. And so I sit down with this woman I just met and I start to do the exercise and she was resisting it. She wasn't wanting to do it. And so I was like, well, okay, so I started to work with her resistance, which is what we learned about SC from Larry. So I started working with like what were the obstacles in the way of her coming up around this. And all of a sudden, over my left-hand shoulder comes this assistant who starts yelling at me, basically. At least that's how I remember it. We had repair many years later, but she started yelling at me basically that I was doing it wrong and I need to stick to the exercise and stop doing all. And I literally was like, I'm doing SC. I don't know what you're talking about. And she was just really upset with me and angry with me. And I felt really impacted by that experience. But now looking back on it, it started to awaken to me that we actually weren't learning somatic experiencing fully. We were learning Larry's version of somatic experiencing, which was this book that he was writing. It took him 10 years to write this book. So it kind of dawned on me, that was like 2004. Like we were learning a different kind of style of SE. I knew Larry was writing this book. And then after I stopped assisting with Larry, maybe when I moved to California, 2006, I guess, we didn't have contact for like 5 or 6 years, maybe, me and Larry. And then someone told me, hey, did you hear Larry's finally putting out this book that he's been working on for 10 years? I'm like, no way. So I contacted Larry and I said, hey, congratulations. I know you've been working on that for a long time. I can't wait to read it. And he was like, yeah, not only is it coming out, but I'm going to be doing my first NARM training, which I didn't know what NARM was. And I said, oh, wow. So I convinced Marcia to go and we went down and got introduced to NARM. And I think it's why I was able to pick it up so quickly. This is really what I was in love with. I wanted to work
Yeah.
more with the relational elements and the complex elements of trauma. So
Yeah.
that's when kind of went full in on NARM and
Mhm.
eventually left the SE community.
Mhm.
I had kind of worked my way to become a teacher, but I really wanted to support Larry in building NARM. So that's kind of that last chapter of
Yeah.
what brought me into NARM.
Yeah. Can you speak to what that was like to kind of organize it for yourself? Because he had written the book, but as I understand, like it really was still evolving in many ways.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Because if you go back and read that first book by Larry and Aline, it's not very clinically oriented. It's very theoretically oriented. Like they
Yeah.
present the orientation of NARM, focusing mostly on the adaptive survival styles, but they don't really do a lot into the clinical. And so he was really finding his ground in this new language of how he was going to teach the clinical approach in NARM. And Marcia and I were like just badgering Larry throughout that training. And so we met Stephanie because Stephanie was it was really the only active training assistant. She was the one holding the microphone. So it was a joke that she would just sit there next to me and Marcia because we would take the microphone all the time. And Larry, was annoyed by us, which he talked about in the introduction to the last book. But he also really appreciated that we were challenging him on these things and helping him start to kind of get clearer. And eventually, then once we finished our program, he invited us in to actually help him shape the 4 pillars and the emotional completion model and the personality spectrum, the relational model. And it wasn't just me and Marcia. There was a man named Neil Wimblad that was a big part of it. There was a few other folks that
Mhm.
were kind of part of it at different periods of the evolution. But we really started to kind of shape these early stages of NARM. Marcia was the one who came up with active coaching, which people in the NARM community know what
We
that
love it.
is. Yeah, we
Yeah.
love that. So yeah, and one of the beautiful things about Larry is that he really is open to evolving, and I really appreciate that about him. And so he really trusted me and us to come in and help him evolve it, and eventually it led into creating the NARM Training Institute and creating curriculum for the trainings, and then eventually that book that we wrote, the last book, the
Mhm.
practical guide, and now we have a workbook coming out in the fall. And
It's just so really kind of witnessing, because I was starting my training kind of at a time when I think a lot of those things were really, I don't have the right language for it, but Larry was still involved with the training and
Mhm.
kind of witnessing that and how there was this bi-directional thing happening where you were bringing things to the table. And I don't know, just really cool to witness that.
Yeah, the NARM Inner Circle got developed because Larry
Yeah.
and I would have these really creative conversations. I'm like, we should record these. Like, these
Yeah.
are really useful. And so that's how that all started. And then,
Yeah.
of course, the podcast. I mean, so some of those ideas were starting because we were just trying to kind of feel our way through this. And, you know, it's like any model now, it's like there's an integration of a lot of other models. So it's not like anything was like brand new necessarily, but there was a lot of like what Larry used to say in the early days. It's like, taking the things that really worked well and leaving some of the things behind that didn't work well, and then fitting them with other things that work well from another approach or another model. And the integration of it felt like it was creating something really new and unique and important because there's just not a lot of focus on complex trauma in the world. So it's felt very exciting. And then, as the NARM Training Institute started to expand, it got to a place where I started to get much clearer about really what I was most interested in. And it was really what was happening in the trainings about the mentorship and particularly about helping therapists find their humanity as therapists. And so I still, of course, love NARM. I'm still teaching NARM in our new center, and we're going to continue doing that, of course. But what we're also wanting to develop more is these programs to support our own inner development, because that's where the relational field all starts from. It starts from what's happening inside the therapist, just like for the parent. It's about the parent doing their work to create a different kind of environment for the child. And so I'm just super excited. And Marcia and Stephanie and I have just been really excited about building all this mentorship. And I've gotten a lot of really amazing mentorship over my adult life. And so I'm excited to continue getting that, of course, but also now giving it back.
Yeah, that's so cool. And I'm so appreciative of the work that you've done. It's impacted and it really, I think, changed the total trajectory of the way that I practice and what I've continued to try to develop myself with. And just so excited about all these programs that you're creating. And I'm currently in the space program. And I think I can say we're doing one this weekend, and I
Yeah,
just can hardly wait
me too. Me
for
too.
this next class. So yeah, just so appreciative of all that. What are some of the lessons that you've really taken away from all of this? Because there's been so many kind of stops along your journey that you've named, but I wonder if you could kind of name more broadly.
Yes, I love the question. Thank you. I think three things kind of came at the same time. I'll see if I can grab them.
Yeah.
The first is really about agency. We talk a lot in NARM about agency. And I mentioned before, it's like feeling one-dimensional and then moving into more three-dimensionality. And I think like many people who have gone through complex trauma, I just felt so victimized. And then I projected that onto people and situations that either weren't responsible or only partially responsible. And that doesn't feel good either, like to project my own suffering and my own feeling of powerlessness onto systems or people. And even though it is true that there's people and systems that are doing that actively, I want to relate to those people and systems differently. And so that's been like a huge shift for me, that in NARM, we talk about kind of moving from child consciousness into adult consciousness. And I remember, you've heard me tell a story, but I remember literally one of my first sessions with Larry, like during the session, I literally felt, I was a 30-year-old man with kids and stuff. I literally felt like I was growing up into my adulthood during that session. And I've heard now other people say that about NARM. And that's the agency. That's like really finding that, yes, I have been and will continue to be hurt and harmed, like a lot of us, everyone on the planet. And there's ways that I can relate to my own suffering and to the suffering of the world that doesn't perpetuate, this really intense self-loathing and powerlessness and all of those feelings that were really overwhelming for me as in my younger life. And, of course,
Mm.
I still hit periods of that, but I think I've come so far from that. So I think agency is one of my answers there for
Mhm.
sure. The other second one that comes to mind is definitely about community and just how important it is. Because when I was growing up, my community felt complicated. And then, of course, like seeking for community and always feeling kind of on the outside looking in. And in the somatic experiencing community, particularly in the early days, just finding people that were like-minded, and that was so relieving to just be around other people that had similar kind of sensibilities and perspectives and interests. And being around a group of therapists is so comforting because people are reflective and caring. And then, of course, what we've developed in NARM and now CTTC, just like incredible people that we have in our community. And it's like, I want our professional community to be a place that people don't feel like they have to be part of, but they can always return to just to tap in or to be very engaged or not barely engaged at all, just so that there's a place that we can come back to that feels like there's a possibility somewhere for connection. And that's become a huge piece for me. And then really the third piece is kind of my shift from, I was so focused for a while on somatics and really thinking so much from the bottom up. And I was one of the people that was like, kind of railing against, that those people are all in their head and stuff, which is really
Mm.
railing against a strategy that I have and projecting it out.
Yeah.
And I do still love the bottom up work. I love it. And I really have come full circle to really understand the importance of including all of us at the same time.
Yeah.
So the body, the thoughts, the emotions, the relationships, the spiritual experience, like all of it has to be there. And that's really helped me feel much more compassionate towards myself and then towards other people that are struggling to kind of find their way back home.
Yeah.
And they all seem connected, actually, now that I'm saying it.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. How are you holding that? How do you see them as connected?
I'm thinking about, like, you brought up space this weekend, and like the focus on the space program is that we're working with three levels simultaneously. We're working with the personal, the internal, we're working with the interpersonal, the relational, and we're working with the transpersonal. And so it's like all these elements within a community, of course, too. So all these elements kind of being brought into this program in a very specific way. They all feel like that's Like you said earlier, I guess we're bringing all these different elements for Marcia, Stephanie, and I that we're bringing together and offering to other folks to join us in that.
I love that. Thank you for naming that. That seems like a really good place maybe to start wrapping up.
Yeah. And thank you, because you're a huge part of it. For a lot of people, you're their first kind of introduction to NARM. And so they're working out or doing dishes or falling asleep, and they're listening to your voice, very comforting and passionate and curious. And so I just really appreciate, you showing up in Scottsdale and volunteering to be vulnerable with me, that someone you had never met before. And here we are 5 years later.
Yeah. Wow. I'm feeling so touched right now, and just so much gratitude, of course, for my own path and all the things that I continue to learn. But also, I get so excited about all the people coming into this community and all the wonderful souls that I'm getting to meet. I'm sure I'll meet more. Yeah, I'm just feeling really grateful in this moment and appreciative of all the work that you've done and what you're creating.
Yeah, me too. I'm so glad we get to do this. And who knows what the future has for any of us on this planet. But this moment right here, I'm glad we can take this in and celebrate each other and what we're doing. So thank you for being part of this, a big part of this. Thank
you, Brad. Appreciate that. Well, I don't know. I don't want to end this, but I guess it's time.
Yeah.
But folks can, if you're curious about any of the things that Brad and I have been talking about, be sure to check out the website. And I look forward to connecting with everyone.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Brad. Thanks so much for joining us for today's episode. To find more information about our guest, check the show notes or visit us at complextraumatrainingcenter.com/transforming trauma. You can also connect with us in other ways. We're on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. If you're a licensed mental health professional working with complex trauma and are interested in learning the NeuroAffective Relational Model, we're excited to share with you about our upcoming NARM therapist trainings. The NARM therapist training is a clinical training where you will be trained in a comprehensive developmental framework and clinical approach for resolving the long-term impacts of ACEs and CPTSD. As you learn and integrate NARM, you will receive individualized support and join an engaged professional community of therapists passionate about healing complex trauma. Learn more about this training and reserve your spot by visiting complextraumatrainingcenter.com. Thanks to Andrea Klunder and the Creative Imposter Studios for producing and editing, to Elisa Sponseller for our album art, and to Brad Kammer for the creation of this podcast. We look forward to building community and connection with you and changing the world by transforming trauma.